You are standing inside a palace that doesn't sleep. It listens. The marble beneath your feet holds whispers from centuries ago, the kind that taste like rosewater and fear. The air smells of amber and secrets, and somewhere, behind a screen of golden filigree, a woman exhales as if afraid her breath might betray her lineage. Before we step deeper into this story, take a moment to join the circle of listeners who keep these lost voices alive. Tell us, where in the world are you watching from tonight? Istanbul? Cairo? Delhi? Maybe London. The echoes of history reach farther than empire ever could. Leave your mark below, subscribe for the stories the textbooks left untold, and together, let's awaken the past that still breathes beneath the marble. The year is 1618. The empire stands at its zenith, and so does its illusion. Topkapi Palace gleams like a promise made of stone. White domes under a blue sky, courtyards humming with fountains, corridors lined with Iznik tiles that seem to pulse with light. But inside those tiles lies the first truth of empire. Beauty can be a cage. Beyond the courtyards and peacocks, behind the latticework windows of the harem-e Humayun, hundreds of women live in curated silence. Here, laughter is rationed, footsteps measured, and emotions rehearsed before mirrors taller than men. Princesses of the blood royal, Sultan Kuzluru, are taught early that their lives belong not to themselves, but to the dynasty's shadow. Their worth is determined not by affection, but by alignment, whose wife they will become, which alliance their hand will seal. In the school of the imperial harem, lessons begin before dawn. A chorus of soft bells wakes the women, the kind that hum rather than ring. Tutors enter silently, their faces veiled in gauze, bearing books wrapped in silk. The girls recite verses from the Quran in voices barely above a whisper, their syllables blending into the sound of the fountains outside. Then come the other lessons, the ones not written in ink. An elder woman, known as the Kalfa of obedience, begins the Terbiye-i-Itaat, the discipline of obedience. No whip, no chains, just ritual precision. The princess must kneel for an hour, motionless, balancing a silver bowl of rosewater on her head. Any spill means starting again. She must speak only when spoken to. She must bow not to men, but to the order they represent. Day by day, gesture by gesture, she is sculpted into silence. Kosum Sultan, the most powerful woman of her age, once watched these rituals from behind a silk screen. Her gaze, cold as moonlight, lingered on her daughters as they practiced the art of not existing too brightly. "A flame that burns too high," she once murmured to her attendants, "invites the wind." Her words, preserved by a court diarist, became the harem's creed. To outsiders, the palace brimmed with luxury. Perfumed courtyards, jeweled slippers, servants who glided like shadows. But within, power operated through subtler chains. Even a raised eyebrow could summon punishment. Even a sigh could echo too loud. The harem's silence was not submission, it was choreography. Visitors from Venice and France wrote of women's laughter drifting through latticed windows, but what they heard were rehearsed echoes. Real laughter had been trained out of them long ago. Beneath the music of the oud and the rustle of silks, something else breathed, a quiet too deliberate to be peace. Each princess was assigned a companion slave called a gözde, literally the favored one. But the bond was less friendship than surveillance. Every glance, every word spoken in private was recorded and relayed to the chief eunuch, who in turn reported to the sultan's mother. In Topkapi, love itself was a political liability. One evening, a young princess, Aishi, barely 13, refused to complete her obedience drill. She dropped the silver bowl deliberately, the rosewater spreading across the marble like spilled light. The Kalfa struck her cheek, but the girl didn't flinch. "Even roses bleed," she whispered, a phrase later scratched into a windowpane near the harem baths. That pain, historians say, still bears the faint marks. Outside, the Bosphorus shimmered with ships from 100 nations, each bringing gifts, gold, and rumors. The empire looked eternal from the sea, but within its heart cracks had begun to form, hairline fractures beneath the glitter of control. The Tervil etat was more than ritual. It was rehearsal for survival. The same hands that learned to pour tea without trembling would one day sign decrees, direct assassinations, and govern provinces through husbands who thought themselves kings. Yet the price of such power was the erasure of the self. Nights stretched long in the harem, filled with the murmur of women praying not for freedom, but for the strength to endure their gilded captivity. The marble absorbed it all, the prayers, the anger, the dreams. And if you walk those corridors today, you might hear them, soft footsteps trailing you, as if the palace still remembers every soul that dared to dream beyond its gates. As dawn seeps over the palace domes, the camera lingers on a window where the morning light glances off the old pane etched with trembling words. The whispers of the past rise like incense, fading into the sound of the sea. For the empire is not made of stone, it's made of silence. And silence, once broken, remembers everything. The night smelled of crushed jasmine and fear. Lanterns floated over the courtyard like dying stars, their reflections trembling in the marble pools of Topkapi. Inside, the palace did not sleep. It waited. Somewhere in the east wing, a child's cry echoed once, then vanished into the corridors like a forbidden song. It was March 15th, 1623, the night Princess Fatma Sultan, 15 years old and trembling beneath her weight of silk, was to be given away. Not to a man, but to an empire's need. The ritual began long before the ceremony. 3 nights prior, Fatma had been led into the Aina Odası, the chamber of mirrors. Walls upon walls reflected her from every angle, multiplying her into infinity. Each reflection was flawless, silent, obedient. The Kalfa of purity, a tall woman with silver-threaded hair, circled her slowly, whispering the verses of restraint. A royal bride, she said, must see herself not as flesh, but as symbol. Symbols do not weep. Fatma's reflection looked back, eyes wet, lips trembling. And if the symbol breaks, she asked quietly, then the empire breaks with it. The days that followed unfolded like pages torn from a darker scripture. At dawn, she fasted until the taste of honey made her dizzy. At noon, she bowed until her spine screamed in protest. At dusk, she was bathed in rosewater and recited lines from the Quran until her voice hollowed into a whisper. Every ritual, every prayer, stripped her a little more of her own reflection. By the time the wedding day came, even the mirrors refused to meet her gaze. Outside, the courtyards glittered. Drummers lined the pathways, beating soft rhythms that disguised unease as celebration. Eunuchs scattered coins among the servants, while Kusum Sultan watched from a high lattice balcony, her expression unreadable. A mother and a monarch stitched into one. Her daughter's fate had been sealed not by cruelty but by necessity. The groom, Kara Mustafa Pasha, was twice Fatma's age and 3 times her ambition. His loyalty had to be purchased not with gold, but with royal blood. In the world of the Ottomans, marriage was diplomacy's quietest weapon. As the call to prayer ended, Fatma was dressed for the ceremony. Layers of crimson and gold embroidered with Quranic verses wrapped around her like armor. A crown of pearls pressed against her temples, its weight both regal and suffocating. Behind her, attendants hummed hymns meant to ward off the evil eye, though none could banish what waited ahead. The procession moved through the palace like a slow-moving dream. Fountains murmured, torches hissed in the cold wind, and the scent of musk thickened the air. When Fatma entered the grand hall, she hesitated. Before her stood a throne gilded in silver, beside it a veiled man whose silence felt heavier than command. Kosum's voice drifted through the air, firm and ceremonial. "Daughter of Ahmed, shadow of the Prophet's house, Walk toward your duty." The girl obeyed. Each step echoed like a heartbeat against the marble. When she reached the throne, her knees gave way, not from fear, but exhaustion. The attendants rushed forward, lifting her gently, their hands trembling as if afraid the empire itself might bruise. That night, the harem was forbidden to speak. Doors were sealed, guards doubled, and even the musicians were dismissed. Only the bride's chamber was lit, a soft, amber glow spilling from the carved lattice above. The imam's voice faded. The curtain fell. What happened next survives only in fragments. The physician's notes, the servants' testimonies, the scent of camphor preserved in the linens. They speak of the bridal examination, a ritual disguised as sanctity but carried out as submission. 2 matrons entered first, carrying bowls of water and unlit candles. They chanted verses of purity, their hands trembling slightly as they placed the water on the floor. Then came the groom, silent, his steps measured and cold. "Do not fear," whispered one of the matrons, though her voice betrayed her. "The night will pass quickly." Fatma's answer was simple, a whisper so faint it might have been a prayer. "So will life." Outside, the Bosphorus wind howled like a mourner. In the distant chambers, Kosum Sultan stood before her prayer rug, her eyes fixed on the direction of Mecca, but her thoughts drifting toward the girl she had just sacrificed. Power demanded obedience. Obedience demanded offerings. And tonight it was her daughter who bled for the throne. By morning, the palace smelled of incense and silence. Fatma emerged pale and motionless, escorted by servants who kept their eyes to the floor. The mirrors along the corridor reflected her, but her reflection no longer looked back. Something had shifted. An emptiness now lived where a person once had. Court records describe her thereafter as gentle, devout, and restrained. But those words hide what the empire could not name, that the girl who once dreamed of freedom had become the ghost of her own duty. As the camera pulls back, the palace returns to its tranquil facade, the fountains whispering, the tiles gleaming, the city awakening to another day of empire. Yet deep within the harem's heart, behind the sealed mirrors, the air still carries the faintest echo of that night's prayer. Because when a voice is broken in silence, it does not disappear. It lingers, waiting for history to listen. It is midnight in the palace again. You walk through corridors scented with sandalwood and fading roses, the air heavy with the breath of centuries. Candlelight trembles across gold-leaf walls, casting halos that dance upon embroidered veils, each thread a shimmer of grief disguised as grace. Somewhere beyond the lattice, a single note of weeping threads through the silence, so faint it might be memory, or something the stones themselves remember. The air itself seems to listen, holding its breath for a story no one was meant to tell. Long after Fatma Sultan's cry faded into the Bosphorus wind, the empire continued to hum with the quiet agony of its daughters. The marble halls remained immaculate, the peacocks still strutted through the courtyards, and Topkapi glimmered with the deception of serenity. But beneath the domes where songbirds once fluttered, silence nested instead, heavy, deliberate, unbroken. There was always another girl, another marriage, another curtain drawn between a life and its freedom. Safia Sultan's story survives only in shards, a Venetian envoy's letter describing a bride of rare wit, silenced by decree. She had refused to bow during the Terbiye-i-Itaat, the ritual of obedience. Her refusal was not loud, merely still, a moment's pause mistaken for rebellion. For that defiance she was confined to the mirror hall, where attendants whispered she forgot her own name before she was released. "They took her voice," wrote the envoy, "but not her gaze, and that frightened them more than rebellion." In those mirrors, she was made to practice her smile until it pleased the attendants. Her meals were measured by obedience, her prayers timed to the rhythm of submission. Each reflection blurred until she could no longer tell which image was hers. When she finally emerged, she spoke softly and walked slowly, as if each word carried the weight of chains. The palace chroniclers later praised her newly acquired humility. They did not mention that her eyes never again met the horizon. Then came Aishi, barely 14, whose poems once adorned the walls of her tutor's study. Her verses spoke of light trapped in silk and the sea that cannot see the sky. When the poems reached the ears of the Sultan's advisors, they were deemed dangerous. Words too alive for a woman meant to be still. They were burned as blasphemy, their ashes mixed with rosewater and sprinkled through the harem baths. Only one line survived, hidden in a servant's diary. Even a caged bird can teach silence how to sing. In her final days before marriage, Aishi wrote her last poem in secret ink upon the lining of her wedding gown. No one noticed until decades later, when the fabric was restored in a museum, and faint words bloomed beneath ultraviolet light, ghostly calligraphy spelling out, "My name will not end with the night," and Humasha, whose name meant Phoenix of the Moon. She vanished entirely, erased from the imperial register sometime around 1640. In the archives, her page remains blank except for a smudge of dried ink, as though someone had tried to write her and thought better of it. Some scholars believe she was exiled to the Black Sea coast under false charges of sorcery. Others whisper she was walled alive within a garden pavilion, her tomb disguised as architecture. The empire called these stories unverified. The palace chroniclers wrote of virtue, of harmony, of divine order. They painted the harem as a paradise of perfume and poetry, where women sang beneath latticed moonlight and power moved with elegance, not blood. But between those words lay another history. The silence between words, where obedience was carved from fear and luxury masked the architecture of control. Servants remembered hearing footsteps in corridors long emptied, soft laughter echoing where no one walked. An old gardener claimed that roses planted over certain courtyards bloomed redder than all others, as though watered by secrets too dark to tell. Yet still the empire's records glowed with sanctity. "Our princesses live in bliss," one decree read, "protected from sorrow by divine will." When the empire finally fell, its silence did not. The marble remained cool. The mirrors still reflected nothing. For decades, historians stepped lightly through these corridors, unwilling to disturb what was left buried. Even in modern Istanbul, families whispered lineage carefully, knowing that remembering could still be an act of disobedience. Then, in 2015, a young archivist named Leyla Karaka opened box number 4721 at the Başbakanlık Osmanlı Arşivi. Inside were sealed letters, some written in cipher, others in hurried Ottoman script, their ink browned with time. The envelopes carried no royal seals, only faint impressions of pressed jasmine petals. Karaka, who had grown up listening to her grandmother hum ancient lullabies about the girls who slept with open eyes, knew at once that she had found something forbidden. One letter, addressed to the Mother of Shadows, was unsigned. It read, "They say history forgets women, but it is women who remember history. If my name is erased, let my words haunt the hand that writes it." The discovery sent ripples through the academic world. The letters spoke of bridal rehearsals, forced fasts, and rituals designed to dismantle individuality, all long dismissed as foreign exaggerations. Yet here they were, described in the precise handwriting of palace scribes and physicians. The letters even listed prescriptions: rosewater for swelling, laudanum for trembling, silence for survival. Karacha's team spent years translating them, tracing each line to living descendants in Istanbul, Sarajevo, and Crete, women who, centuries later, still carried the stories in lullabies and wedding laments. "They told us never to sing that song in daylight," one elderly woman confessed during an interview. It was the song of the daughters who disappeared. As the evidence mounted, a chilling realization emerged. The empire had not simply buried these women, it had perfected the art of forgetting them. Official portraits were repainted, birth records redacted, even mosque endowments rewritten to erase names. The very act of memory had been outlawed. Forgetting became faith. Yet the silence between words persisted. It survived in the cadence of Ottoman lullabies, in the restrained politeness of royal etiquette, in the way modern women of Istanbul still lower their voices when speaking of ancestry. History may claim progress, yet the echo of obedience still shapes the tone of love, the posture of ambition, the definition of dignity. Even now, when a daughter bows her head in deference she does not believe in, some part of the palace lives on within her gesture. Through moonlit halls, whispers awaken, voices of the forgotten daughters rising from stone and silence. History may fade, but their echoes endure, patient as the marble that remembers. Even now, the empire breathes their names through the quiet between worlds.